call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Education Amendment Bill, interrupted debate on third reading.
When the third reading debate was interrupted, the Honourable Marion Street was on her feet. She has 8 minutes and 30 seconds remaining to speak, should she choose to take it. The Honourable Marion Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I do wish to take up the residual part of my speaking time on the Education Amendment Bill, third reading. If I remember correctly, when I was interrupted by the dinner hour last day, that this was on the order paper, I wanted to talk about two things which were in the bill and one thing which was not. Labor is supporting this bill. We support the information matching between the Ministry of Education and the New Zealand Teachers Council, and we do that for a number of reasons. First, there is the distinct possibility that teachers who have been deregistered have not come to the attention of employing authorities who may be looking to appoint teachers to teaching positions. This information sharing between the register of teachers and the Ministry of Education allows the Teachers Council, in regard to people employed in teaching positions, to identify the person's employer and the person's registration status. This is an essential item, Mr. Speaker, for the protection of the quality of teaching in our schools. In addition to that, there is a more pedestrian purpose to this matching of information, and that is no less valid, and that is where the Ministry is in fact able to identify through this information sharing the accurate and appropriate salary entitlements and eligibility to any allowances to which teachers might be entitled. And so we support that information matching and see it at both levels, one as a very clear indicator of the quality assurance of staff teaching our children in schools, and the second, as I say, a more pedestrian matter, but one that is nonetheless important to the teachers in receipt of salary entitlements. The second point, Mr. Speaker, that is important is, and that the Labor Party supports entirely, are the changes that the Select Committee has made to the process around police vetting of all those who have access to students in teaching establishments. The Select Committee saw fit to shorten up the time frame for the police vetting process, and I think there is a suitable level of urgency to that reflected in where the Select Committee got to. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay a tribute to the Chair of the Education and Science Select Committee and those who worked on this bill for progressing it to this stage with a useful amendment such as that. The one thing that I am disappointed about, Mr. Speaker, however, and I remain disappointed about it, was that the National Party members on the Select Committee and indeed the Minister saw fit not to accept some proposed amendments from the Labor Party that arose out of our Education Amendment Bill number 3, which was in train prior to the last election. And one of those amendments was to make it explicit for principals to ensure that their schools provided guidance and career counselling in schools. This, Mr. Speaker, is an example where, in fact, it would be entirely possible to join the dots of the compulsory education sector with the tertiary education sector, where the government is looking to make it harder to enter tertiary institutions, harder to stay there, and harder to access the support mechanisms like student loans and allowances in order to succeed in tertiary institutions. And one of the cries that goes up constantly, Mr. Speaker, is that the young people arriving in our tertiary institutions are not sufficiently prepared, are not adequately prepared to make suitable and appropriate decisions about their tertiary study. How can they make appropriate decisions about their tertiary study and have more chance of succeeding in a chosen discipline or a chosen degree program if they are not equipped earlier than that with suitable career choice advice and career guidance? To make it optional for schools to have not only guidance counsellors, and that's another whole area in itself, but career counsellors, is to deny that these things ought to be joined up. It is in fact to deny a common sense thing that is provided at low cost through our secondary schools that can equip our young people in particular to succeed or to do better in their chosen tertiary course of study. And Mr. Speaker, this is a shame that this is not included in this final legislation. It is something that would not have caused any major problem. It would be something that schools who are already doing it could continue to do. The fact that it is not being made explicit that principals should ensure that guidance and counselling on career choices and career pathways is in the bill is a point of neglect, and it is a shame that this has not been included in this legislation. Mr. Speaker, the Education Amendment Bill that we are debating for its third reading today makes some significant advances, not only for the quality of education, but for the protection of students within it. It is a shame. It is short-sighted. It is unnecessarily partisan of the government not to include Labor amendments which would have seen career counselling mandatory, would have seen it an insistence on it being there in the school curriculum. We will never get the kind of quantum leap we need in this economy if we are not preparing through the pipeline of the education system our young people to make appropriate and successful tertiary education and career choices for themselves, whether it is to go on to university, polytechnic, into an apprenticeship, into some form of trades training or some other appropriate avenue for further education. Young people should have access at every point in their high school and compulsory education sector training to that kind of advice. And it is a matter of regret that that is not in this final piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Colin King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak during the third reading of the Education Amendment Bill. Our education system in the 21st century certainly needs to be dynamic and flexible, and this bill will go some way ensuring that that happens and that these changes keep up with our education system. The bill itself does it in a number of ways, firstly by adapting the police vetting system that is required of non-teaching staff employed at schools that may have unsupervised access to children during school hours. And secondly, the bill introduces an information sharing between the Ministry of Education and the Teachers' Council, which will finally, Mr. Speaker, close off a loophole for ongoing unregistered teachers. With regards to the police vetting of non-teaching staff, this also makes mandatory the police vetting of anyone 17 years or over at a homeschooling situation. In fact, these requirements around the police vetting apply to early childhood education centres, primary schools, intermediates and secondary schools. Additionally, the responsibility for these police vets are required to be